Close your eyes now and allow the world around you to gently fall away. Let the hush of the evening settle around your shoulders like a soft cloak, and take a deep, calming breath. Tonight, we begin a quiet journey into the heart of the wizarding world, deep within the walls of a place you know and love. A place that holds not only spells and secrets, but a deep, timeless magic that whispers just beyond hearing. Tonight, we return to Hogwarts. But this isn't a story of duels or daring escapes. No, this is a slower tale, a gentle exploration of something long forgotten, something tucked away in the furthest corner of the castle's most mysterious library, the restricted section. There, behind chains and charm-locked gates, lie books that hum with old enchantments. Books that don't just tell stories, but remember them. Some are filled with knowledge deemed too powerful to be taught. Others are merely misunderstood, covered in dust and shadow, waiting patiently for someone kind and curious enough to see them for what they truly are. Our story begins not with danger, but with wonder, the kind of wonder that grows in stillness, that calls softly to those who listen, and if you listen closely, you may hear it too, the gentle rustle of parchment, the sigh of ancient bindings, the faint glow of ink that refuses to fade, all hidden behind that black velvet rope and the knowing eyes of Madame Pince, who guards the library with a quiet intensity. As the castle sleeps, lanterns flicker in high archways, and portraits begin to doze in their frames. The scent of aged paper and ink drifts through the corridors like the remnants of a half-remembered dream, and somewhere, tucked between stacks of forbidden volumes and magical maps, a curious student is about to make a discovery, not one of power, but of understanding. If soft magic, calm discovery, and quiet moments of mystery bring you comfort, you're in the perfect place. And if you find peace in stories like this one, feel free to like this tale, subscribe for more, and let yourself return here whenever the world feels too loud. Now, find your most comfortable spot. Let the gentle weight of sleep begin to settle in your limbs, because in just a moment, we'll begin our slow walk into the quietest part of the Hogwarts library, and there, beneath the enchanted ceiling, the books are waiting to share what they've hidden for centuries. Let's begin. Her name was Clara Thistlewood, and though she was a fifth-year Ravenclaw, most people barely noticed her in the common bustle of Hogwarts. She wasn't loud or particularly flashy with her spells, and she certainly wasn't the type to race a broomstick through the Quidditch pitch or compete in dueling club. Clara was quiet, not shy, just thoughtful. She preferred parchment to applause, candlelight to sunlight, and mystery to excitement. Her magic often came in small, precise charms, a levitating quill here, a soft flickered lumos there, performed without flourish, but with gentle focus. Her robes always seemed a little ink-stained at the sleeves, and she carried a satchel that held far more books than it ought to, thanks to a particularly clever, undetectable extension charm she had found in a borrowed volume. Clara's favorite place in all of Hogwarts was the library, not just the grand, echoing center filled with eager students, but the tucked-away corners, the spots where no one else thought to sit, places where the scent of old leather and dust clung to the air and sunlight filtered in through narrow, forgotten windows. Her best friend, Oliver Penrose, was a Hufflepuff who never minded how long Clara could spend buried in her books. In fact, he often sat beside her just for the peace it brought. Oliver had a kind heart and a habit of feeding stray measles when he thought no one was looking. He was the sort of friend who remembered birthdays without needing a calendar, and who quietly waited when Clara paused mid-conversation to scribble a thought down before it vanished. Their friendship had formed early, on the first train ride to Hogwarts, when Clara had lost her wand beneath the seat, and Oliver had retrieved it with a shot. Oliver opened one eye and smiled sleepily. Found something interesting? Clara didn't answer right away, but something about the silence that followed felt like the beginning of a story, one hidden long ago and just now starting to unfold. The slip of parchment resting between the pages of warding spells of the 12th century didn't belong there. Clara was sure of it. The book was part of the general reference section. Dusty, yes, but hardly exciting. And yet here it was, a single piece of parchment, worn smooth at the edges, as though it had passed through many hands before hers. She lifted it gently, feeling an unusual warmth radiating from its surface, not hot, but comfortably warm, like the last breath of steam rising from a forgotten teacup. There was no ink, no writing, just the faint impression of a symbol, an archway with curling tendrils of ivy drawn around its top. Oliver, Clara said softly, holding it up so he could see. This was inside the book. Oliver scooted closer, blinking more alertly now. Looks old. Maybe someone used it as a bookmark. She shook her head. It's humming. Indeed, a faint vibration trembled through her fingertips as she held the parchment, almost like a heartbeat, slow and steady. What does it mean? He asked, his voice lowering instinctively, as if sensing the room's atmosphere had shifted. I'm not sure, Clara murmured. She turned the parchment over in her hands. Still nothing, but when she brought it closer to the candlelight beside her, something began to change. In the golden flicker of the flame, faint lines bloomed across the page, drawn in glimmering silver ink that hadn't been visible before. Slowly, the image took shape, a map, or at least something like it, not of the library itself, but a single chamber, small, hidden, and beneath it, scrawled in the same gleaming ink, were 5 careful words. The shelf that doesn't exist. Clara blinked. Oliver leaned in. What's that supposed to mean? She stared at the parchment, eyes narrowing slightly. Do you remember what Madame Pince said last year, when that third year tried to accidentally wander into the restricted section? Oliver nodded. She said the charms on those books would turn curious fingers to stone. No, not that, Clara said. The other part, she said, the restricted section is guarded not just by locks and chains, but by memory. Oliver frowned. Memory. Clara held up the map. Maybe some things are hidden not by illusion, but by forgetfulness. They looked at one another for a long, quiet moment. Then Clara stood. Oliver stood too, brushing dust from his sleeves. "We're going, aren't we?" Clara smiled softly. "You don't have to," he grinned. "Of course I do." They moved together through the darkening library, past rows of ancient shelves and sleepy portraits that barely glanced up from their oil-brushed naps. At the far end of the main reading hall stood a high iron gate, cold, curved, and enchanted to shimmer faintly in low light. Beyond it lay the restricted section, guarded by thick chains, clever charms, and Madame Pince's ever-watchful glare. But the map didn't lead through the gate. Clara turned sharply just before it, walking parallel to the locked entrance. Her eyes scanned the nearby wall, where shelves of standard reference books stretched upward toward the ceiling, all perfectly cataloged and labeled. She stopped suddenly. There was a small gap between two heavy bookcases, so narrow it could be mistaken for a trick of the shadows. But the map in her hand pulsed gently, confirming the hidden path. With Oliver close behind, she slipped into the gap. It was darker here, and the air grew cooler. The narrow path curved slightly, and then opened, just barely, into a small alcove where an odd shelf stood, crooked and freestanding, leaning ever so slightly, as if weary from holding up secrets for too long. There were no labels, no catalog tags, no numbers. But the shelf hummed. Clara approached slowly. Her fingers hovered near the edge of the wood. As she stepped closer, the map in her hand turned to ash, silently, instantly, disintegrating in a soft swirl of light. She blinked. "Did it just—" Oliver started. "Vanished," Clara said, like it completed its task. She looked up at the shelf. There were only 3 books resting on it, each one bound in dark leather, spines smooth and untitled. But when Clara reached for the middle book, a soft shimmer rippled across the space. She paused. "I think we're meant to take one," she whispered. "Not all." Oliver studied the books. "Like choosing a door." She nodded. Her fingers hovered, then gently settled on the leftmost volume. The moment she touched it, the shelf stopped humming. The book grew warm beneath her fingertips, and as she lifted it carefully into her arms, a soft pulse of silver light flickered across the binding. Then, just as quickly, the glow faded. The shelf gave a low, creaking sigh, almost a sound of relief, and then was still. "What now?" Oliver asked quietly. Clara looked down at the book. Its surface had begun to shift, tiny glowing letters appearing on the spine. "On forgotten magic and the memory of spells." Her breath caught. She glanced at Oliver, then motioned to the table just behind them, old and unused, tucked against the stone wall. They sat down, and with care, Clara opened the book. It did not begin with a chapter or a title page. Instead, there was a note, scrawled in tight, hurried handwriting. "If you are reading this, then memory has remembered you." Beneath that, a single phrase glowed softly in gold. "Say the name you've forgotten." Clara looked up. "What name?" Oliver shrugged gently. "Maybe. It's not a person. Maybe it's something you used to know." She sat back and thought. The book's surface shimmered faintly, as if waiting, patient, not urgent. She closed her eyes. Then, almost without thinking, she whispered, "Astri." The name came out like a sigh. The book responded instantly. A pulse of light rippled across its pages, and then they turned on their own, flipping gently, one by one, until they settled on a section titled The Spell of Silent Understanding. Beneath it, a symbol Clara had never seen before glowed faintly. She reached out, and without touching it, she understood its meaning. The spell had no incantation. It worked only when the caster truly wanted to hear, not to answer, not to fix, but to understand. A spell for empathy. Clara's breath slowed. This wasn't dangerous magic. It was delicate magic. Forgotten, perhaps, because it asked for something soft, something still, something rare. She looked at Oliver, who had been reading silently beside her. He met her eyes. "I think we found something important," he said gently. Clara closed the book. "I think we've only just begun." And somewhere, far behind them in the quiet of the alcove, the shelf gave one more sigh, almost like a thank you. The restricted section had spoken, but only in a whisper and only to those who listened. The library had fallen into a deeper kind of silence now, the kind that settles in long after the last footsteps have faded and even the portraits have drifted into sleep. The candlelight flickered gently, reflecting off high-arched windows and casting soft golden ripples across the ancient wooden floor. Clara and Oliver sat at the same tucked-away table near the crooked hidden shelf, the mysterious book still resting quietly between them. Neither of them had spoken for some time. The spell Clara had found, the spell of silent understanding, lingered in her thoughts like a gentle echo, inviting quiet reflection rather than action. It hadn't rushed them. It hadn't glowed brightly or cast a beam of power. It had simply revealed itself, like a page waiting patiently to be read. "I don't think this book is full of spells in the way we're used to," Clara whispered, tracing the soft edge of the page. "It's like feelings wrapped in magic, like emotions were turned into spells and then forgotten." Oliver leaned forward, chin resting on his folded arms. Maybe they weren't really forgotten. Maybe they were set aside because they weren't dramatic enough. Clara nodded slowly, because they were too gentle. She turned another page. The parchment shifted beneath her fingers, almost silk-like in texture. This time, the book revealed a new entry, the Lantern of Listening. It wasn't a spell exactly. It was a magical object, and according to the glowing script, it had once existed within the library itself, centuries ago, hung in the oldest corner of the restricted section, not to illuminate the room, but to reveal voices hidden in silence, whispers lost between words, secrets buried inside thoughts too fragile to be spoken aloud. Clara sat straighter. "It's still here." Oliver blinked. "What?" She pointed to the hand-drawn sketch at the bottom of the page, a tall, elegant lantern with curling bronze vines and a glowing crystal in its center. "It says the lantern only activates for those who come seeking, not for knowledge, but for comfort, and it's still listed as being inside the restricted section." Oliver raised his eyebrows. "But we're not technically in the restricted section." "No," Clara said softly, closing the book, "but we can be." A moment later, the two of them stood once more before the heavy iron gate, the key to the restricted section glowing faintly inside Clara's pocket. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even Oliver, because technically she wasn't supposed to have it. It had been left behind once by a distracted student assistant during a late-night reshelving shift, and Clara, ever curious and quietly responsible, had held on to it, unsure whether to report it or use it. Tonight, it seemed the castle had chosen for her. With trembling fingers, she pressed the key into the lock. A soft click echoed in the silence. The chains withdrew slowly, sliding away like a sigh, and the iron gate creaked open, not ominously, but respectfully, as though the library knew it was welcoming not intruders, but seekers. Inside, the air felt thicker, almost velvety with age. The scent of ancient ink, pressed leather, and spell-dusted parchment hung in the air like perfume. Rows of darkened books lined the walls, each one humming softly with wards, enchantments, and memories. But they weren't looking for danger. They were looking for light. Clara led the way, guided by the image in her memory. Past towering shelves, past ancient spellbooks chained to desks, past glass cases that shimmered with protective enchantments. Finally, in the farthest corner, near a wall that curved slightly inward, they found it. The Lantern of Listening. It hung from a delicate iron hook, unlit, its surface dust-covered and still. The vines on its bronze casing curled gently, and the crystal inside was dull and gray. Clara reached up, her hand barely brushing the base of the lantern. Nothing happened. She frowned and stepped back. Oliver tilted his head. Maybe it needs something. They stood in silence. Then Clara whispered, "What if it's not meant to be activated with magic?" Oliver blinked. "Then how?" She looked at him, her voice barely more than breath. "What if it's meant to be spoken to?" She closed her eyes and placed a hand over her heart. Then, very softly, she whispered, "I want to hear what was forgotten." At first, nothing changed. Then, the lantern stirred. A soft light bloomed inside the crystal, gentle, golden, and flickering like a candle in the wind. It grew slowly, casting a warm glow across the stone wall behind it. And with the light came sound, not loud, not clear, but present. Whispers, echoes, words that had never been said aloud. I wish I could be brave enough to try. If only someone would listen. I hope this spell doesn't hurt anyone. I miss her. The voices were not ghosts, not memories in the way pensive strands worked. These were unspoken thoughts. Feelings left behind by students, professors, even visitors. Echoes preserved by magic in the walls of the restricted section itself. Clara stood very still. The lantern pulsed gently. "This is what the books were protecting," she said. "Not spells that could harm, but feelings that needed to be heard." Oliver's expression softened. "It's beautiful." Clara stepped closer to the wall, now illuminated by the lantern's glow. Soft patterns of light revealed inscriptions hidden in the stone, tiny runes, names, dates. The script from the book appeared before her eyes again, this time on the wall itself. A spell not spoken still echoes in the soul. To hear it is to honor it. To honor it is to heal. Clara turned to Oliver. This isn't about unlocking forbidden magic. It's about remembering forgotten magic. Magic that speaks in whispers, that listens when others won't. He nodded, and someone hid it here, not to bury it, but to protect it, until someone came looking. They stayed for a long while, just listening. The lantern continued to glow, and the voices came and went like waves against a quiet shore. Eventually, Clara looked once more at the soft light and whispered, "Thank you." The lantern dimmed slowly, fading back to stillness, as though satisfied it had been seen. The two of them stepped out of the restricted section as gently as they had entered, closing the gate with care, restoring the silence. As they made their way back through the quiet library, Clara glanced down at the book still tucked under her arm. Its title had changed. It now read, "To Those Who Choose to Listen," and she knew there were more pages still waiting to be revealed, but not all at once, only in time, only when one was ready, because some knowledge, the most powerful kind, doesn't rush to be found. It simply waits, with quiet patience and soft, glowing light. The library had welcomed them back as if it had known they would return. The next evening, Clara Thistlewood and Oliver Penrose found themselves once again wandering the candlelit paths between the shelves, no longer out of rebellion or mischief, but out of a quiet calling. The lantern of listening had shown them that forgotten magic wasn't dangerous or destructive. It was emotional, empathetic, and alive in ways they hadn't imagined. And the book Clara now carried with her, the one they had taken from the hidden shelf that didn't exist, had begun to change. It had become responsive, not like the animated books that screamed when opened or the ones that bit when mishandled. No, this book responded to her questions, not in words, but in pages that gently turned to reveal something new, something relevant, something timely. Earlier that day, Clara had thought, "I wish I understood what this magic was for," and when she opened the book later that evening, a soft page had appeared titled, "Magic Meant for Moments." Now, as they walked side by side through the empty rows, Oliver softly whispering Lumos to guide their path, the hush of the library wrapped around them like a velvet curtain. Occasionally, a book would flutter its pages in a dreamlike doze, or a far-off clock would chime softly, always gently, always as if part of the rhythm of their quiet search. Tonight, they weren't looking for one specific thing. They were following the magic as it revealed itself. They paused again at the crooked hidden shelf. Clara ran her fingers gently along its edge. "Do you think there are more books here?" Oliver tilted his head. "It feels like this shelf changes, like it gives what's needed." Clara smiled faintly. "Then maybe we should ask." She closed her eyes and placed her hand softly on the shelf. "If there's more magic to understand, if there's more that needs to be remembered, show us." There was no flash, no grand enchantment, just a slow, low creak. A fourth book appeared, emerging from what had previously been a blank space, its spine made of soft gray cloth, its cover wrapped in something that looked like aged moonlight. Clara's breath caught. She picked it up and turned it over. The cover read, "Whispers in Wandless Silence." Oliver gave a low whistle. "That's poetic." They returned to their table in the corner, lit only by a single floating candle. Clara opened the book carefully. There were no chapters, no index, just a single quote at the top of the first page. Some spells do not need wands, only intention. Below it, an image formed slowly. A young witch, eyes closed, surrounded by gentle light, her hands resting over her heart. Around her, ghostly memories of laughter, sorrow, and wonder drifted like fog. She's not casting anything, Oliver murmured. She's remembering, Clara said quietly, and somehow, that's magic. They turned the page. This section of the book detailed an ancient practice used briefly during Hogwarts' earliest years, a form of emotional magic that required no wand, no incantation, and no movement. It was done entirely through reflection, by bringing a memory fully to mind, focusing one's intent to relive it gently. A student could temporarily bring echoes of that moment into the physical world, not as illusions, but as sensory magic, warmth, light, a remembered scent, a feeling. These weren't just spells, Clara said, brushing the edge of the page with awe. They were invitations, invitations to remember something real and let it shape the present. She stood, the book still open, and walked toward the open space beside the table. She closed her eyes. "What are you doing?" Oliver asked gently. "I want to try." She focused, not on grades or magical theory, but on a memory. A simple one, her mother brushing her hair in front of the fireplace one winter evening, the crackling of logs, the scent of cinnamon, the soft hum of a lullaby in the background. Clara's breathing slowed, and then a gentle warmth spread around them. The faint scent of cinnamon filled the air. A soft golden light flickered near the ground, like firelight dancing across invisible wood. Oliver blinked. "Clara!" She opened her eyes. The moment faded, but the comfort remained. "It worked," she said softly. "Not a spell, just a feeling." Oliver stood beside her. "Do you think this is the kind of magic the world forgot?" Clara nodded. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was quiet. They sat again, letting the magic settle. Around them, the library remained calm. Books did not leap from shelves. No alarms sounded. The castle seemed content, perhaps even pleased. The next few pages of the book described how this form of magic had once been taught in early Hogwarts, not as a course, but as a ritual for students struggling with loss or fear. It had never been standardized. It had never been graded. It had simply been offered. Clara gently traced one of the diagrams in the margins, a sketch of two students sitting across from each other, palms open, sharing a moment through mirrored memories. A caption read, "To feel what another remembers is to understand what cannot be said." Oliver tilted his head. "Maybe we've been thinking of the restricted section all wrong." Clara looked at him. "Maybe it's not about guarding magic from students," he continued. "Maybe it's about protecting magic that students once needed, but forgot how to ask for." Clara's chest warmed. The idea lingered as they closed the book. They made no plans to hide it, no need to sneak it away. Tonight had not been a discovery. It had been a conversation with the books, with the castle, with something older than any of their lessons. As they prepared to leave, Clara whispered softly into the silence, "Thank you." And from deep within the shelves, a soft rustling answered back, not from fear, not from warning, but from memory and from welcome. The days that followed passed gently, and though the routines of Hogwarts resumed, the usual hum of lessons, the chatter of common rooms, the clatter of plates in the great hall, Clara and Oliver walked through it all with a quiet sense of awareness that hadn't been there before, as though they were now part of something older and softer than the daily rhythm around them. They didn't speak often about the books in public, but each night, after the castle had fallen into its sleepy stillness, they would meet in the same alcove behind the hidden shelf that never seemed to appear on any map, and always something new was waiting. Sometimes it was another book, worn, warm to the touch, and filled with forgotten teachings about empathy, memory, or listening. Other times, it was something stranger, a bookmark that changed color depending on mood, a wandless spell that calmed fear, a passage of text that could only be read when two people held the book together. But one night, something different appeared, a mirror. It stood tucked just beside the crooked shelf, half covered in cloth, the surface dusty but intact. It wasn't grand, about the height of Clara herself, framed in dark wood carved with small symbols that looked like musical notes. Neither of them had seen it there before. Clara stepped toward it cautiously and gently lifted the cloth away. The surface shimmered, not like glass, but like calm water in candlelight. "What do you think it does?" Oliver asked, his voice quiet. Clara didn't answer right away. Then she softly replied, "I think it reflects what we bring to it." She reached forward, and with the lightest touch of her fingers to the frame, the mirror rippled. Slowly, a scene emerged, not of the present, but of the past, not her past, not Oliver's, but someone else's. A young Slytherin boy, perhaps no older than second year, sitting alone in a dark hallway, hiding a letter in his cloak, his face shadowed in fear and confusion. The scene held stillness, but no sound. Oliver leaned in. "That's not us." Clara nodded. "It's someone else's memory." As they watched, a warmth grew in the mirror's reflection, and the boy's hand lit faintly as he opened the letter. On it, the words shimmered slowly, "You are not alone." Then the mirror faded, returning to its silvery calm. Clara placed a hand on her chest. "This magic isn't just for us to find, it's for us to share." Oliver turned to her. "Then maybe that's our choice, not just to learn from it, but to carry it." They stood quietly for a moment, the weight of that thought settling in like snow on a windowsill. Then Clara whispered, "Let's do it." From that evening forward, their visits to the hidden alcove changed. They no longer came only to discover. They came to participate, to choose. One night, they found a book titled Echo Spells and Shared Moments. Inside were gentle enchantments meant for two people, charms that allowed pairs to share dreams, memories, and even intentions. They chose to try a simple one, Remembria, a spell designed to share a happy memory between friends. They sat on the floor of the alcove, knees touching, eyes closed, and thought of the same moment, their first trip on the Hogwarts Express. How Clara had spilled ink on her sleeve, and Oliver had given her his spare handkerchief. How they'd both laughed at the same joke from the trolley witch, and had spent the rest of the journey reading the same chapter of a storybook in turns. As they focused on the memory, a soft glow passed between them. Neither of them moved, but both felt the same warmth rise within, the exact feeling of being seen, even then, even young, even new. When they opened their eyes, the glow faded. Clara smiled. That felt lovely. Oliver nodded. Like we'd polished the memory a little? They began writing things down, not for themselves, but for others, creating small scrolls of comforting memories, placing bookmarks of warmth and calm inside books most students overlooked. They left gentle clues, not to secrets, but to kindness. One night, they found a way to place one of the memory books in the regular stacks, not labeled or grand, just there for someone to find. Another night, they tucked a note inside a first year's Transfiguration textbook. You're doing better than you think. No one knew it was them. But that was the beauty of it. Their exploration had turned into stewardship, their discovery into care. In time, the restricted section didn't feel restricted at all. It felt like a sanctuary, a sacred, quiet space where magic wasn't shouted, but whispered, not brandished, but shared. And each night, as they left, Clara would gently rest her hand on the hidden shelf and say softly, "Thank you for trusting us." And though the shelf never spoke, she always felt it answer, in silence, in warmth, in magic that listened. The evening had settled quietly over Hogwarts, wrapping the castle in a soft indigo glow. The last golden rays of the sun had long since slipped behind the mountains, and the stars had begun their steady twinkle above the towers. Inside the castle, fires glowed gently in common rooms, portraits snored in their frames, and the deep hush of night had returned once more to the halls. Clara and Oliver stepped into the alcove behind the hidden shelf for what had become their nightly visit. But tonight felt different, gentler, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Clara reached instinctively toward the shelf that never stayed quite the same. Her fingers brushed the worn wood, and to her surprise, it rippled under her touch, not like a spell triggering or a door opening, more like an invitation. A section of the wall behind the shelf shimmered softly, the stone giving way to an arched opening they had never seen before. No spell had been spoken, no lock undone. It had simply appeared as though it had been waiting, not for someone clever, but for someone kind. They exchanged a glance, silent but sure, and stepped through together. The passage beyond was narrow and round, carved from smooth stone, and softly lit by floating orbs of light that drifted ahead of them like fireflies. It didn't feel like a secret passageway or a trap. It felt like walking through memory, calm, purposeful, and very, very old. At the end of the corridor, they entered a circular chamber. It was smaller than the great hall, larger than the alcove. Its walls were lined with floating books, dozens of them, quietly circling the room in slow, graceful loops. In the center stood a raised dais, and on it a single book rested, open. But what made Clara's breath catch was not the beauty of the chamber, nor the enchanted books, nor the dais itself. It was the feeling. Here in this room, the air felt like a heartbeat. Warm, steady, alive, like the room itself had been waiting for someone to come home. They walked slowly toward the central book, their footsteps muffled by the smooth stone floor. As they approached, the floating books paused in midair, turning gently toward them like curious eyes. The central book glowed faintly, its pages illuminated in a light that seemed to come from within. The title read, "The Heart of Hogwarts, Magic Meant to be Remembered." Beneath it, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "To those who have listened, to those who have wondered, to those who have seen magic not as power, but as presence, welcome." Clara reached out and gently turned the page. What followed was not a list of spells or secrets, not a catalog of forbidden magic or legendary tales. It was a story, a soft, meandering narrative written by many hands, each one dated and signed in careful script. The earliest entry was from Helga Hufflepuff herself. "I have left this chamber as a gift, not to the strong, but to the gentle, not to the loud, but to the listeners." Within these books are spells of kindness, of memory, of patience, spells the world may forget, but must never lose. As they turned more pages, they found entries from others, students, professors, even caretakers, who had stumbled upon the hidden books and left behind their reflections. A charm to soothe grief without taking it away. A spell to remember the sound of a loved one's voice. A ritual for silence, not emptiness, but restful quiet. Every page carried not only magic, but meaning, and the insight became clear. The restricted section had never only been a place of danger. Yes, it housed powerful spells. Yes, it required caution, but buried among the dangerous texts had been another purpose, a softer one that Hogwarts had quietly preserved without ever speaking of it aloud. The books of emotional magic, of healing spells, of wandless empathy, had not been hidden to prevent misuse. They had been protected because they were precious, not meant to be controlled, only discovered when someone was ready to receive them with humility and care. Clara rested a hand gently on the page. "I understand now," she whispered. This was the heart of what they wanted to pass on." Oliver knelt beside her, looking up at the softly circling books. "And we're part of it now," he said, "not because we were clever, but because we were quiet enough to hear it." Another page turned, on its own this time, and a message shimmered across the parchment. "The magic that listens is the magic that lasts." A small drawer opened on the side of the dais with a soft click. Inside was a wand, not carved for power, but for focus. A smooth length of wood, its handle shaped like a gently curled hand, palm up, always open. Beside it sat a blank book bound in soft cloth, its cover simply labeled, "For You." Clara lifted it, heart full and quiet. The last page of the great book offered a final message, glowing in golden light. "What you write here will be remembered, not because it is loud, but because it is true. She and Oliver didn't need to speak. They simply sat side by side and began to write, not to impress, not to record spells or secrets, but to reflect on what they had found, on how it had changed them, on how they wished others would feel when they too were ready. And above them, the books continued their slow, graceful dance, guarding magic that had always existed, magic that had only ever asked to be felt, softly, truly, and completely. The walk back through the quiet corridors of Hogwarts felt slower than usual, not because Clara and Oliver were tired, but because they were both wrapped in the hush of something sacred. The kind of stillness that follows a truth finally spoken, or a song's final note left hanging sweetly in the air. They carried no stolen spells, no trophies, no relics, only the small, blank, cloth-bound book labeled for you, now carefully nestled in Clara's satchel. The castle around them felt different, too, though perhaps it hadn't changed at all. Perhaps it was they who now saw it with clearer eyes. Every shadow was no longer something ominous, but something resting. Every creak of floorboards above them felt like the old building stretching gently in its sleep. Even the portraits they passed seemed to watch them a little more warmly, as though sensing something unspoken in their presence. It was late, the hour where the stars glow their softest, and even the ghosts drift slowly through walls instead of gliding. The torches flickered with a quiet rhythm, and the scent of old parchment still lingered faintly on Clara's fingertips. They paused outside the Ravenclaw common room. "I think this is where I should leave you," Oliver whispered with a small smile. Clara turned to him, her expression gentle. "Thank you for all of it." He shrugged softly, but his voice was steady. "Thank you for listening to the books, for sharing it with me." They didn't hug. They didn't need to. There was a closeness between them now that didn't ask for gestures, only the quiet knowing that they had walked through something timeless together and would carry it with them long after. Clara climbed the spiral staircase slowly, her mind still settled in the memory of the chamber, the way the pages turned with thought, how the magic welcomed rather than tested, how the books floated not to boast, but to protect. When she reached her dormitory, the others were already asleep. The moonlight poured through the tall windows in quiet beams. She set her satchel down and pulled the Svalzuk gently from inside. It felt warmer now. She climbed into bed, pulling the covers around her like a cocoon, and opened the first page. It was still blank, but tonight, that felt perfect. Not empty, just waiting. She picked up her quill, dipped it gently in ink, and rested it against the soft page. No pressure, no rush. She would write when she was ready. For now, she simply closed the book, held it to her chest, and let out a deep, slow breath. The castle breathed with her. The magic, soft and eternal, settled all around her, and sleep found her easily that night, not out of exhaustion, but from a deep, peaceful calm. She had seen the heart of forgotten magic, and it had seen her too. And now, dear dreamer, the halls of Hogwarts are quiet once more. The floating candles have dimmed to a soft glow. The portraits have returned to slumber in their gilded frames, and the very stones of the castle seem to hum with a quiet peace. Somewhere high in the tower, Clara sleeps beneath moonlight, a gentle smile resting on her face, and a closed book cradled near her heart. Nearby, Oliver dreams too, his thoughts warm with golden light and memories shared. And the library, oh, the library is resting now. The shelves breathe slow and deep. The restricted section, wrapped in velvet silence, cradles its secrets not with fear, but with love. Its books do not wait for power-hungry hands or clever thieves. They wait for those who listen, for those who feel, for those who wonder gently and walk slowly. Magic, you see, is not always about spells or sparks. Sometimes it is the courage to remember, the softness to understand, the kindness to carry light into places forgotten. And sometimes the most powerful spell is a whisper, a hand resting on a cover, a moment of stillness where something old and magical is finally heard again. So, close your eyes now. Let your thoughts drift to quiet places, between the shelves, beneath the arches, through the candlelight, and into the warm hush of pages turned gently by unseen hands. You are safe here, held by stories, by memory, by enchantments too kind to ever fade away. May the magic of understanding follow you as you sleep. May the gentle wisdom of forgotten books rest softly in your dreams. And may you always remember that sometimes the quietest magic is the one that stays with you the longest. Good night, dear listener. The castle will be here when you return, and its magic will always remember you.